Stephen and I will spend 2 minutes on slides or something along those lines, and then we will just dive into code. But just this is who we are. I'm Eagle Hansen, and you can find me on Blue Sky. I'm not super active, but you can also watch what I do on GitHub, and you can also link in with me on LinkedIn if you want to. And yeah, what else? I think that's about it. Stephen, you want to say a few words about yourself?
I guess I'm less active on Blue Sky than you, but you can also find me there. I have also my own GitHub, LinkedIn, and we try to stream from time to time. So if you are super into the development of bUnit and you want to just hang out with us,
yes.
Well, we try our best.
that was a promise or a threat, depending on how you look at it, where we would stream every Friday on the various social channels we have. We have some YouTubes and we have some LinkedIn and Twitch. It's less than that, but we will see if we get back to it on a regular cadence, maybe after summer. Anyway, enough of that. Let me just make sure I have things where I want them to be. Okay, well, so this talk is really about bUnit, but I think first it might be worthwhile to just have a quick chat about the types of testing you can do with Blazor. And so typically when you're building a Blazor application, you should consider two kinds. You can do the more end-to-end or browser-based testing. And there, the general recommendation these days are to use Playwright from Microsoft, and that will enable you to basically drive your full Blazor application through the browser. I will throw a link to a presentation in the comments that I've done where I cover that, so you can watch that if you want to learn. And you can also give a shout out to Dan Ruff, who is on later today. He will probably mention things related to Web Application Factory that you probably want to use, and there's going to be some nice updates to that in the .NET timeframe that will make it easier. But I do have a hacky version that I reference in that other presentation that I will link to, so you can find out how to do that. Now, the alternative is obviously that you test your Blazor components in isolation, and that is what we can do with bUnit. In general, I would say if you are creating a Blazor application that real users will interact with, you will probably want to have both Playwright and potentially also some component tests. That is the test where you just test the component isolation. If you're building a component library, like the mod Blazor and the various other component libraries out there, you probably want to have a lot more component testing because you want to test the components in isolation. So there is, there's no silver bullet, and as I said, we will talk about bUnit today and cover that. And there's lots of content out there on the internet, including that presentation I will link to shortly, for testing Blazor applications or Blazor components with Playwright 2. Okay, so what is bUnit? Well, bUnit is a library to test Blazor component isolation. And what does that mean? Well, it means that you are able to render the component and test it just as it is, but it's not as specific to any particular render mode. So Blazor applications can both be WebAssembly based or server-side based or static server-side rendering. And that's probably, I don't know, a render mode for Maui. I don't know if it has a specific one. Maybe you know that, Stephen. But anyway, bUnit is kind of its own render mode, and it doesn't really care what render mode your component will be surfaced into the end user at the end of the day. Now, what bUnit also is created to feel a lot like a regular, it just enables you to test, but it should also enable your unit test to look like any other regular unit test. And it also means that you can reuse existing testing libraries that you might be using otherwise, like Fluent Assertions or MOQ or InSubstitute or other libraries. bUnit is just a library we add next to whatever testing framework that you are using. So bUnit is not a testing framework. It's a library that you add to your XUnit testing framework or test project or XUnit or NUnit. Or
doesn't replace my XUnit.
Exactly. It's something that you add to it, like you add MOQ or InSubstitute or whatever. And I think there's also a new testing framework called tUnit out there. So there's a bunch of things that we add bUnit on top of any of the frameworks out there you might be using. Something that bUnit does come with is we call it test doubles, but that typically means a specific mocked version or stop version of first-party services that comes with Blazor. So examples of that is in Navigation Manager. We have a bUnit Navigation Manager. We have a fake or we have an ability to do something with JavaScript. We have authentication, authorization. We have a bunch of other things that make it easy to get going. Obviously, you will have to come with either test doubles or with real services that your components will be using themselves. Now, one thing I want to really double click on is that bUnit doesn't run in the browser, so it doesn't run your JavaScript. It doesn't really do anything with your CSS and HTML. With your CSS, that is. But so what you do is you get the output out from the component that is produced, the markup, but it doesn't actually run the browser. It's run completely in C#. So obviously, if you have complex JavaScript logic that is part of your component that you're testing, then you might want to turn to something like Playwright to test both the end-to-endness of that component, so that you both run the JavaScript and the C#. Now, the advantage of bUnit not running in the browser is that it makes it easier for us to create a very fast and predictable test because you don't have a browser in the mix. So bUnit in general runs as fast as normal unit tests that don't deal with any network or similar things. Where so typically in the milliseconds it takes to run a bUnit test, whereas a Playwright test is typically a couple of hundred milliseconds depending on the type of things you're doing. Now, there's another thing I usually highlight is that even if you don't want to write tests, and you're free to not want to do testing, but if you have a component, for example, that is not behaving as you expect, and you find it hard to get into a situation where you can debug it, maybe it's a component that you want to test in a WebAssembly app. Well, you can very easily set up that component, give it some state, and then debug into it using bUnit. So that's not a bad fallback. Anyway,
I want to make a small amendment to the browser one, because
sure,
it doesn't
go ahead.
only imply that you cannot run JavaScript, because we had it a few times.
Mm-hmm.
If you have an href button, which normally would do navigation inside your Blazor application, that doesn't work. So I mean, on purpose, it doesn't work because we are not a browser, and that's browser logic. You would anyway test the wrong things for unit tests, but we will talk about that later.
Yeah. Okay, so that was the what is bUnit. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And do you want to share your screen, Stephen?
I will share my screen, the entire screen, for the first part. I hope it's working. I have to edit to the screen. I think someone has to edit to the screen. And I will start with the typical. Can I edit to the screen? No, I cannot edit to the screen. So I want to start with the simple Hello World application, or the Hello World counterexample, which is you have a counter. You can click a button and it increases by 1. That is roughly what happens.
Well, actually, Stephen, I want us to start by showing people how to set up a bUnit test project. Let's do that first. So we put the chicken before the egg.
That's true. Short question: can someone put my screen live right now? Yes, perfect. Okay, so we already prepared something. If it's too small, let me know. I will make the IDE bigger later on. I just need a browser in the beginning. But let's start with making.
Maybe we can ask our hosts to expand the shared video to the full screen and move our heads so we get a bit more. Well, now they took Stephen away. Oh, dang it! Now it's just me.
Oh, I'm back. Hey, how are you doing? So lovely. Okay. If the screen is coming back, I will just create a new project. Exactly. So we have a new project here. That is, the default stuff you do in your solution. And here we have your regular unit tests. So I'm a big fan of XUnit, but it doesn't mean you have to use it. You can use MS test and unit 3, and to some extent also tUnit. I don't have so much experience with that. Did you ever use it? I didn't.
Yeah, I haven't tried it, but it seems promising.
Okay. As all developers, I'm really good at naming, so let's call it another test project. That will work very fine. And there are only very, 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 very few steps to make that work. First, let's go in here. Let's open just the CS project. Nothing special until now. And obviously, we need bUnit. As we heard earlier, we need kind of a library. And how would you include a library? Well, by a NuGet. So let's take bUnit. That's this guy here. In the latest version, which is 140. Well, there's also a version 2. I hope we can talk a bit about this later on, what our plans are for version 2 and beyond. Anyhow, okay, we are almost done, aren't we? But we can go a bit better.
Yes.
Like, you brought the point that we can have like a kind of a native feeling to our tests. So if you look at the, in your code, in your production code, this is HTML and we have C# code. Wouldn't it be amazing to have the same thing in your test code? That's the cool thing. You can have that. That's pretty simple. You only need one thing additionally, and this is up here. So the project SDK basically tells, what kind of thing the .NET compiler has to do with it. And if you ever check, for example, your production code, you can see there's a .web or whatnot, and we can use some mode in between. We can say, hey, I want to have .razor. And that helps us to kick in the Razor source code generator, which is responsible to take our Blazor components and translate them to plain old C# files. But the compiler should do this, not we. So
yeah,
let them do the magic. Okay,
and that will enable us to write our test code in Razor files, which we can show a comparison between the two options. But it does make it easier to set up the component under test in the test files if we do it in Razor files. So yes, that's why we want to make that small adjustment.
Yes. Let's have a look at the classic counter example. I almost assume that 99.9% of the viewer will know how this looks like. We pimped it a bit. We added an additional input. We did a bit of additional logic, but it fits on a screen zoomed at 175%. So, the logic is still, it's not that much. I would say let's write the first unit test, shall we?
Yes. Let's do that.
Okay, so first things first, we can add just a Blazor component because, we learned we can write our tests in Blazor style. So let's do this. We are calling this the counter tests. Very, very beautiful name. Now, all of the magic, or let's say the majority of magic we have, comes from a single class you can inherit from. So this is also what our documentation is telling. Because like A inherits, and then we take the test context that comes from bUnit. You can see this here. And there, the majority of magic is coming from. So we can now here is HTML. You could just write something here. Not sure if this makes sense now, but you could. Why not? But you can start here. Let's do a classical. Oh, you see, Copilot knows already where I'm driving at here. Let's do a normal fact. That's XUnit. Let's not use abstract public void.
While you type that out, let me just double click what the test context is. So test context is the thing that enables us to, render a component, pass in parameters to it, and so on and so forth.
Okay.
So what
Very
Stephen is doing is basically setting up the
good.
test now. Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry,
Okay.
Stephen.
Now, what I want to show is if you ever press now base, because we inherit from the test context, you see there is a lot of stuff. And this is what we offer basically. A lot of the utility you get is hidden somewhere here. So, let's do this. First, what are we gonna do? Well, if you ever dissected the component, like this counter component, you could do something like new counter that is, why can I find it?
You need to add a reference to the test project.
Oh, you are so good. I did this with the other project. You're so good. But I forgot. Obviously, with this one, obviously, I have to add this. We are not that magical. But you could do new counter. Here you can see that. That's a Razor component. That's your component code. The thing is, what should you do? There's not much you can do. And that's the whole problem. You can instantiate those types or objects, but that's basically the end. So you might have now noticed that the component itself is not really responsible for rendering and its life cycles and whatnot. That's what bUnit does here. So we let's start. We say like, okay, we have our cut. So this is short for component under test. Oftentimes folks use service under test, so SATs. I don't know how to pronounce that perfectly without letting it sound weird. And then we have the render method. And now here comes the big magic. We can say in inline notation, take my counter. This is absolute valid. And this would be also valid if our counter component has inputs. We can just write them like this in here. So it feels like you just write your normal HTML code, you write your normal production code just as a test. It doesn't feel like a different world. That's why we not prefer, but we recommend that way. To use it in this way. That is what we do. Okay. With this, we have something we can work on. So we have our component under test, and here, and this is not so different for folks who did already Playwright or Selenium or any kind of end-to-end testing framework. You know that you normally take stuff and then you select some CSS classes. So you have a selector, you take that element and you do things with it. And if we have a look into our counter example, we have a button here, we have this current count here, so that's what we want to do. So obviously our test means we click that button and we want that the count is then increased by 1. So let's do this. So we can say here, cut find. This is finding an HTML element inside our DOM. And Copilot is absolutely correct here. I want to click that button. Yes, do this, please. And with this, we basically, so now that's maybe a bit different from what you would expect in an end-to-end testing framework. If you use something like click, what we do internally is we just invoke whatever is here. It's not I wouldn't say a physical click because I have a lack of better words, but it's not a real click. It's just we invoke whatever is written here. If you have the click here, it's an on click. If you have the change event here, it's on change, and so on and so forth. So that is very important. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a browser click where someone clicks on that. Why is this so important? Well, we said we are not a browser, so in theory, you could click on an ahref and you get the routing towards a different page. That would not happen in bUnit. But then again, we are unit testing framework. Okay, now that we did this, we can put this element in here. So we get this button back. This is an HTML. Oh, no, that's not the HTML element. Cut find is the HTML element. We want to have our P element. And our P element, that is very good. We can go basically and say, hey, give me any P element where the attribute role has the value status. So this is this one. We could also entirely remove the P because that's a paragraph or not. It's very much an implementation detail, I would argue. It could also be a span and it would be still right.
Yeah.
So often, sorry.
No, I was just agreeing with you. It's a good idea to not. It's a good idea not to tie your test code to implementation details. So if you are building a Blazor application, then the type of element may be an implementation detail. If you are building a reusable component that other people might be using, maybe you're building a component library, then it might be less of an implementation detail. Then it might be important that it is a P element. But if a div versus a span element that doesn't have any semantic difference, so then it's probably doesn't matter. Then you can use a role selector instead. So yeah, it does. It can be worthwhile not to include specific elements in your test if you can avoid it.
Yes. So now I just have this element. And I can get the text content outside, which you can see if I hover over, it's just a string. So that's just the content inside. And now we can basically assert, like what do we want here? And I can say, okay, the content, this is this guy here. We say the markup matches to something else. In this case, it's pretty simple. We just say that's current count or whatever is the number. That would be, if my math is not so wrong, but I can also lose my brain, ask ChatGPT. Apparently that's correct enough. Current count is 1. And then we are good to go. So let me execute that
Oh,
test.
the drum roll. Let's see if you did it
The
right the
drum roll.
first time.
Oh, that's always that's the thing if you do live coding. Oh, it
Mm.
is fortunately correct. That is, whew, you can see it here. So one thing I want to also amend what you said earlier. We can see here, I hope it's probably very small. I just can copy paste it probably. The runtime here is 200 milliseconds. That is true, but mainly this is because of the first run. If I do the same test again, I know that it's not really smart, but let me just execute the same tests again.
Yeah, so it's the
And
first test you run in any XUnit project typically takes a little bit longer to run, but it's
exactly. So
yeah. So the first one has a bit more overhead. The second one and third one is very fast.
exactly. So the second one is just 2 milliseconds. That is,
Yeah.
that is the speed. And it is very, very difficult to get comparable values in an end-to-end test.
With good
I'm
reason.
generous.
Yeah.
Yeah, with good reason. Exactly. This is our first test. We are
Hmm.
good.
Well done.
Nice, aren't we? Oh,
Yeah.
congrats.
Okay.
Okay.
So what do we want to show next? Do we want to show?
I
Should
just
we
want to
just
show
show
one
the?
thing.
Yeah. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
I want to write the same test just with a normal C# syntax. And instead of the click, I want to use the change event. So let me
Yeah.
just write this guy here because it's here. Let
Hmm.
me do the same here. Well, yeah, let's call it unit test 1. That is absolutely fine. So we have our cut. So now we have to use render component where I use with a generic term what I want, which component. This is this guy here. I can say here this time I want to have I want to have the input. Why is that? Because we also have a beautiful input here. That's this guy. And if you look at the set current count, it just, tries to parse whatever you put in. And if this is valid, it puts the current count in there. Render cycle is triggered. And this one should be then 5 if I use the number 5 as such. So
Hmm.
let's do the same here. I don't want to click that. Thank you very much. I still want to have now, for example, the P. I could do also something like that, by the way,
Hmm.
if I want to. And here is what we also talked earlier about. This is much of an implementation detail. And this is not very stable because if I start adding something like this, another P element, it just finds the first one. And
Mm.
you don't want to have such tests because, if the test is constantly read because you changed a bit of the structure, then it's too much bound to your structure rather than, the observable behavior of your business logic. Okay,
Actually, this might be a good example if we run this test, but what
Oh,
you can also do is,
yeah, of
oh,
course.
well, you
There's
forgot. So,
the
okay, so
text content,
let's
yeah.
double click on two things here. We have the markupMatches method. Let's jump to talking about what that does because it's a bit special. What Stephen could have done could also be just get the string, raw string out and just do an assert equals between an expected string and the string we got from the component. But that obviously is very unstable because any small changes to any white space, insignificant changes to white space in the component itself will cause that test to fail. And we don't want to. We don't want our tests to fail in general if they don't have a good reason to. So what we have in bUnit is the method called markupMatches you saw Stephen use before. And how that works is it understands HTML semantics. So it understands that white space are insignificant. It understands that the order of attributes are insignificant and things like that. So when you pass in something to it, it will actually make sure to validate it against what like it will validate it in such a way that it doesn't break. Do you want to show the alert component test example? We can do that afterward. But yeah,
Yeah,
so
let's do that afterwards. We can do this. That's fine.
mhm,
Let me just take you can see here the text content, or I can make it back. The text
mhm,
content fails here, where I just take the string and take, hey, just check those two guys. Are they literally the same?
yeah.
But I added a small white space here, but
Yeah,
they're
you
not
can even
like
add more
from
after
your,
the colon, for
yeah,
example,
exactly.
right?
So from your browser's point of view, your user's point of view, they get trimmed away anyway. That's what your browser does.
Mhm.
You wouldn't even notice. Also here, obviously. So you don't necessarily want to rely on such structures, because then it can even happen that you do something like this because, like you're formatting, you want to have it a bit differently, and now all of your test fails. But did your test really change? Did the observable behavior for the user change? Absolutely not. Nothing changed.
So then we don't want the test to fail.
Exactly. This is way more stable. Yes, let's go to the alert component because there's a bit more action going on.
Actually, before we do that, you had the example before if you had another p tag in there. So if you can try to add that, we can use the find all method instead and show that off.
Let's show off. I like that. Okay, so we have here another p element, like enter a number or so. I don't know.
So in the code, you want to do find all, and then you can just, because find all will do the same as find does, but it will instead return a collection. So what you instead will do, and you can see we get actually, so it will take the first, but if you find all, you get a collection out, and then you can just pick out the first one. For example, or the second one, if you know it's supposed to be the second one. Again, probably want to avoid selecting things where people will add additional elements, maybe other developers, and then your test breaks. So, but it's an option. So it would be the last one, right? Or the first one.
We can also ask for attributes or whatnot. So you can use link. It's your everyday collection. That is up to you, but that is probably a bit more stable if you have attributes on that. But it can also,
So you can get a collection out of the elements that matches, but then again, you can also see, maybe it's not too clear, but it says CSS selector : in the find all method, and also the find method also takes a CSS selector. So it's probably more efficient just to use the CSS selectors that you're already familiar with from CSS to query the DOM instead of having to do it with link. But it's there, so we have both methods now. Any points we want to cover here before going to the alert component?
No, because we can cover it in the alert component. If we want to continue talking about markupMatches, I just wanted to make the test green. Because, leading by a good example here.
Exactly.
If my naming is off, at least the test should be green.
Okay, let's go to the alert component. No failing test left behind, right? That's how it is.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to just use that to show more examples of what markupMatches does. So if you go to, we have the alert test somewhere else, right?
Of course.
Well, you had it in the other project, or you have it in the copy-paste buffer already. Yes. So here we can show off two more things. We can show that here we are rendering the alert component. We're passing in a bunch of parameters in the very same way that you would be passing in or setting up a component. You would be using your production code in your in your app, and that there is a syntax. I don't think I want to ask Steven to type it out, but there is a syntax where you can do the same thing in C#. It's a bit more convoluted, obviously, but it's there if you prefer to write everything in C# and not in Razor files. Obviously, this is C#, but it's a Razor file, so it's a mix of C# and HTML and markup all mixed in together. And here we can also see on line 33 to 36 that we have the expected output of our alert component. And the alert component is just a standard bootstrap alert component. Now, because we're using a markupMatches, Steven can rearrange, for example, he could put the role attribute in the component itself, or in the markupMatches for that matter. He could put that into, before the class attribute. So he can put the role attribute, and semantically, the markup is still the same. The user will not notice any difference, so the test should not fail. And it will not fail because we use markupMatches. We can also add or remove white space. So if you go and refactor your tests or refactor your production code, then you're trying to filter down so we only see that one?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, it's still hidden behind our faces
already.
Yeah.
That is good. That doesn't matter. You can also see there's something green.
You can see it's green, yeah. And you can also, like other things it's aware of, you can also, now go into the component, you can also change the order of the CSS classes themselves in the CSS class attribute. So if you scroll up a bit on line 3, you can move the alert attribute to the end. And
your browser will not define what to do just by the order. The important
No.
thing is what is inside your CSS rule and the, oh god, strong word, specificity of, what you do
Yes.
there. That is the
Yeah.
important
So
thing.
you can also remove the empty white space. It's a bit noisy that. So you can remove the white space on line 4 in the alert component, for example, or and line 5. Let's make it a bit more compact. So that's sort of typical things you will do when you're cleaning up your components and refactoring them. You're not really changing the content, and that's sort of the magic of the markup matches. It allows us to make those changes without breaking the test.
Yes.
Okay, I think we've covered that point very well enough. Should we talk? Should we show off how to deal with services that component might have a dependency on?
Yes, let's do this. Or alternatively, I can also ask the chat if you want to see me typing out this weird notion in normal C# code. Please go ahead. I try my best not to
Yeah,
screw it up. No. We can also make it vote based.
I'm sure we can do it
Okay.
in 30 seconds if you want to. So
Yeah.
should we just get it over with just to show it off? Okay, you can actually
Okay, you
do it
mean
in
this
the
one,
exact
or?
same. You can just use C# syntax in the Razor file, just for kicks. So maybe do a var cut to. Just keep that around so we have
Oh,
it for
okay,
reference.
okay,
We can
okay. Let's
compare.
go. Code 2, yeah.
Yeah.
And then render
Render
probably.
components then. And then you pass in the generic for render component, which is alert. And now we have a builder pattern. So that would be, I usually write PS for
This one.
parameters, and then,
Sorry. We put this down
yeah,
here.
put it
Then
down
you
on a
have
new
add.
line.
And then for each of your inputs parameters, you can always call that P.
P
So
for
let's stick
parameters.
with, so you can see here, we have dismissed. We could just say false. But I guess you want to go to the tricky one, and it would be
Well, let's
this
take them
guy.
one at a time. Well, we can do that, but yeah, let's do it dismissed first, and then alerts, or kind. I mean, yeah, kind. So as you can see, we have sort of a builder pattern where you're able to strongly typed pass in parameters, which is great because if you refactor the name of your parameters in your component, then your test will also automatically discover that. And with the latest updates that are coming out to the various Razor editors in Visual Studio and in Writer, refactoring component parameters seems to be working more consistently if you're using that component in somewhere else, like you are when you're writing a test. But yeah, go ahead, Stephen. Now you're even cheating. You're actually
Yes.
passing in a array, so you want to have it as a
Yes, I
string.
want to show. That's why it's so cool to use the Razor syntax, because even if you prefer this one, sometimes
Yeah.
if you want to have child content and you want to have like your class or whatnot, it's still easier to, like selectively fall back to
Mhm.
the just plain old Razor syntax rather than using the C# builder pattern. But that is up, to you or to the
Yeah.
user. I was writing the test.
But obviously, if you
Perfect.
were in a proper C# class, then
Yeah, that
you would
wouldn't
have to
fly.
pass in markup, and then you would have to pass in just a string, and a string would be then a string with HTML in it, and then you would have to escape other strings in there like attributes and other things. So if you add an attribute to
Exactly.
that p tag, then you would have to double quote that or use single quotes or use raw string literals or other things as well. So yeah. We
Perfect.
prefer the version above. It's a bit more easy to read and understand what's going
Yeah.
on.
Yes. Perfect. Then let's go to the service container, and maybe depending on the time, we can either talk about V2 or I don't know, like stopping mocking and stuff like that.
Yeah,
Whatever we
let's
prefer.
go.
Okay, let's
Mhm.
go. We have here the weather. So this is also from almost the default from, I guess, .NET 8, where they introduced streaming rendering. I think it was
Mhm.
.NET 8, huh? Yeah, I think so. Where it's not so necessary important for us, as we discussed earlier, like if this is interactive or not. Yes, we have some capabilities checking that, but for 99% of, or let's say 90% of cases, probably you don't care. Also from a testing point of view. The important bit here is you have a life cycle and it is truly async. So if we would go in here, you can see here, normally if you have a repository or a service, which is a, HTTP call, I don't know, database call or whatnot, instead of the await task delay, you would probably have something more meaningful than we have right now. So this is just simulation. Okay, how would we write a test? Let's start. And I think we just continue here.
Okay.
And I already have the outline, but I don't want to have everything. I want to show you something. So just that we're on the same page, if we go here, you can see this thing is registered up here on line 8. It is in the service container of our ASP.NET Core Blazor application. Now, if we go in here, and I want to have this guy, and I just do, let's, for the kicks of it, do this. Let me close that real quick. I'm a big, fan of var. That is also var. So we just make a test where we say, okay, render something, the weather component, and wait until there's elements. Maybe you can already talk about this a bit.
Yes. Okay. So two things going on here. You're rendering the weather, and I think the weather component itself is just a Blazor page. So it has the add page attribute, but it doesn't matter to bUnit. You can have the page attribute. It's just a component to bUnit. Now, when we first try to render the weather component, as you will see, we get an error, and that's actually a question that comes up from time to time in our bUnit repository. People don't understand this error. So what the runtime is telling us, saying, hey, we're trying to render a Blazor component that requires services to be injected into it, and you haven't registered a service. So let's register a service for our weather forecast component. And should we start by using the built-in one that comes out of the box?
So we could just say like, okay, scope singleton doesn't matter for now. We just take our weather forecast repository.
And I don't think it matters if you use add scoped or add singleton here. And let's highlight also the services property that you just accessed. That's part of the test context. So that's why we also, again, we recommend that you have a single test context per test. And when we inherit from the test context in an XUnit test scenario, then XUnit will make sure to instantiate the test context before each test run, and it will dispose of it after each test run. So you get a fresh services collection for each of your test runs. Now, here we see another thing. So now the service is injected and the component renders, but the expectation was wrong. We expected to have two rows in our output. But let's go back to line 55, I believe, and double click on what waitForElement is. So waitForElement is a slightly different version of the findAll method we saw before. It takes a CSS selector like findAll does. There's also a waitForElement singular that also just takes a CSS selector. But waitForElement will do this. It will wait. It will block until that async weather forecast repository is done doing its thing and returning data. So if you go back to the weather forecast repository, Stephen, and just show that to the people again, you will see that it has a delay of 500 milliseconds. So you might have a test case where you have some code that takes an indeterminate amount of time to run. And obviously you can't just say as soon as possible. If you go back to the example, the test example again, if we didn't use waitForElements, we just used findAll, the test would fail because it wouldn't find any at all, right? Because
also, something important before I do this, just check here the execution time. It's 600 milliseconds.
Well, obviously that makes sense because there's a hard-coded wait of 500 milliseconds, but the test fails because it tries to find the elements immediately after it's done the first render cycle. But because we have async code in our test component under test, in this case, a simulated delay of calling an external web API of 500 milliseconds, the test doesn't know that it should actually wait for that stuff to complete because that happens asynchronously in a separate render cycle from your test code. So there is waitForElement, there's waitForState, a waitForAssertion. So there's a bunch of waitFor methods that is built into bUnit that is super effective at doing that. And what it actually does, which is something that's unique to bUnit compared to black box testing that you could do with Playwright is that we know the bUnit renderer knows when a render cycle is complete, so it will stop the world. It will, if you have a render cycle that just loops around, it will stop after each render cycle and allow your test code to react to that, so that we know exactly when a render cycle is done. We don't need to store. We don't need to keep asking. For example, in the browser, Playwright needs to keep asking the browser, "Are you done rendering? Are you done rendering? Is the thing I'm looking for here?" Because we have that deep hook into to the Blazor renderer. And so, if you have a scenario like this in your test where you have asynchronous code happening in your Blazor component, you want to reach for the wait for and then some name. There's a bunch of different methods that has slightly different functionality, but they essentially do the same. They went for a render cycle, then they try and attempt what you asked them to attempt, in this case finding elements. If it didn't find the element, it will wait again and again until it finds it, or there's a default timeout of 30 seconds, I believe, but you can also pass in a timeout if you want to wait longer or you want to wait shorter than that. Okay. And now you have a point about trying to avoid having wait for in your code, because obviously it's not ideal to have a test case that takes 500 milliseconds just because we're calling some external thing or we're simulating a delay.
But that's the thing, you don't want to necessarily go to external things anyway, because they break your test even though your logic is doing what it should do. So while it might seem a bit cumbersome that you have two service containers, the one running in your production app and the one running in your test container or test application, it is also very advantageous, because what we can do now is, let's put this big guy in here. And you can see this is just a stub. It just implements the weather forecast and just overrides something. And the main thing you will see here is there's no async. There is no asynchronity. That thing just runs completely synchronous, because at the end, we just have the return task from results. And as you can see here, there is only, I guess, 2 elements we will return later on, because you can tell that. You see here, forecast to return as 2. So what we can basically do now in the test is we can say, hey, instead of this production thing, why not taking our version? And that we can do like this. No, that's a function. Sorry, we don't need the container.
You just write new. You can just write new, just instantiate it.
I wanted, that was just my IDE stop. And here we can say the forecast, we only want to have 2 elements, just like this guy down here. So
I think it's because it's a nested class underneath the test class you are in right now.
Lambda also works. So let's take the Lambda for now.
Okay.
It will do the same.
Yeah.
Oh, no, you're right. I destroyed. Oh, you're so right. I obviously forgot to copy paste the, closing brackets, and then it doesn't like that very much though. So let's go back to the test. Let's execute that guy. And you can see that thing is green. And we can also now even do a find all if we want to, if I, type it properly, because
that is required. That is required.
Because now there is no async. So this is a bit of a detail how Blazor works, and I'm always a bit back and forth whether or not that's a good idea. Generally, I recommend it to people. If you like logic like this, where you just gather data which doesn't have much of logic, you can just make a stub which is completely synchronous. Because if it is synchronous, then also the Blazor renderer behaves very synchronous. And it makes a lot of times tests just easier. But yeah, there's no one, solution fits them all.
No. And again, if you have a test, for example, that runs, if you have a beefy workstation that you're developing on and the test passes fine on your machine, but as soon as you put it up in the cloud somewhere and run it on, your CI/CD pipeline in GitHub Actions or Azure DevOps or whatever you use to run your test in your CI/CD setup, and if the test fails up there, but it doesn't fail locally, I would start looking for places where you do asynchronous work in your components and maybe add some wait for method calls in the right places in your tests, because that's typically what happens. Things might run fast enough on your machine that you don't need to have that additional wait for, but sometimes it behaves differently on a slow hardware that is shared up in the cloud.
Yeah. Perfect. I guess that is, I would say, almost all you can say about the server's container.
Yes. Should we cover component stubbing or replacing components
Yes.
during testing? Okay, so if
Yes,
you
I
set
like
up
that.
a test example, I will just explain why you might want to do that. So
Okay.
similar to what we just did, where we have some dependency of our primary target for our test. In this case, we had a service we injected into our component on the test, and we wanted to maybe stop that out or mock that out, that service out during testing because we wanted to control the behavior. Maybe it's it's not behaving deterministically. Maybe it's something that's time based or something else. You want a stable test, right? So another thing that your component on test might have a dependency on might be other components, like components that you have declared in the component that it should be using. And if it's not a component that you own, that's not part of your solution, then you may want to, mock or stop or replace that component during testing. For example, if you're using a third-party component library, and that component library makes it hard or complex to set up, right? It might make it hard for you to create a stable unit test of your own basic component that is using some third-party component. Well, then you may want to, again, stop out the component. So Steven just created a third-party button that I guess we can add to our counter component.
Ooh. Not sure what I did there. Okay, we call that onClick.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't we kind of cover the expression? Are you sure? It doesn't want to have anything? Am I right now?
I think you might just need to rebuild. Is it unhappy about the increment counts?
No, it's not unhappy about anything. It's just my IDE playing tricks with me.
Yeah, it gets tripped up. Okay, so imagine that we have a evil third-party button that does a whole bunch of, ad tracking or evilness that makes it hard to set up a test.
It has
Now,
JavaScript.
it has JavaScript. It could also be there. I don't know. It could have like another example is that you might have third-party components that have dependencies on services that then you need to register those services, and they're not really relevant for your test, right? So what you can do instead.
Wait. Am I just right now? It doesn't. That's good that I the last month only wrote Angular code. That is how you do in a normal event callback. It's good, by the way, that I
I
have
think
to
so.
ask for the basics of how to write Blazor components,
Yeah.
and it does compile.
We
But
promise people we know what we're doing. If you want to
oftentimes we
restart
do.
your editor to make it not be unhappy.
Let's do that. Okay, yeah, because the basic idea, as you said, is we just remove whatever is in the DOM and replace
Hmm.
it with something, and that whatever is that replaceable, it's completely under your control, which makes it, much more stable. It's partially sometimes quicker. That's
Hmm.
really up to you. So that's what you want, oftentimes.
Yes. Is it happy
No,
now?
it does not. No, it doesn't not have a property
I
on
think it is
click.
because I'll go back. I know what's going
I
on. If
know.
you
Yeah,
go
I
back to the
know
code,
also what's going on. It's the @ sign. Oh boy,
yes. Yeah.
it's
There we go. Now it's happy. Yes.
so
Yeah.
amazing, amazing. That's not the problem. I don't have a
It
child.
doesn't have
So
child
yeah,
content. Yeah.
It doesn't exist anymore. That is on me. I could have added that, but I didn't want to. Okay, you see, so
There we go.
now it is working, and
Yeah.
it's because it's by pure coincidence. Now I am that evil third-party vendor, which just decides, oh, that's not a button anymore. That is an H element or a div element. Anything. It doesn't really matter what it is.
Mm.
That is up to the implementation of the third-party library. Now the
Yes.
problem is we were relying on an implementation detail of that third-party library. We were
Mhm.
expecting somewhere there's a button, but now, just because we made an update of the NuGet package, it just breaks. We didn't change anything in our code logic, and this is not what you want.
Yes.
What we
Excellent point.
offer What we offer, obviously, is we can basically, it's component factories. And here's a lot of things you can do. There's a lot of magic. The easiest to explain is probably addStub. So
And that will work
addStub,
in
it does work.
99% of
Yeah.
the cases, right? So
Yes.
yeah, go ahead.
I can do this one. And now I'm a bit of a fancy guy and I want to debug that code. And what I want to show is how does the markup, which is rendered, look like? If we go in here, I know it's a lot of stuff. The important bit is you don't see this A element I added or any button element or whatnot. So addStub basically replaces all of the markup with an empty string. That's all the magic.
So maybe we want, just to demonstrate that we're not cheating, comment out line 12 and do the same thing again.
That is an excellent point. I would never.
So what addStub does is that we're basically telling bUnit, whenever you stumble across a third-party button in the render tree, render this thing instead. So we are essentially removing the original stop from the thing, from the output. Now, what you can do still is you can, if you go and here you can see Stephen has highlighted that if we uncomment the addStub method, we get the HTML back that the third-party button was supposed to create for us. Now, if you add it back in again, you can also show that we can actually pass some HTML or some text to the method that will be shown instead. I believe it's just, here was a button, right? And so now we can simulate. There's more advanced things you can do. You can also get access to the parameters that were passed to the third-party button if you want to assert against if you want to validate that your component is using the third-party component correctly. So that's another thing you can do, that you can ensure that you are living up to that. Your components is passing the right things to the third-party component.
And what we also can do is we can provide our own button. And the important bit here is it has to, or it should mimic to a big extent, depending on your test, the public Blazor API. What do I mean with public Blazor API? Where everything where you add parameter and stuff like that, this should be there. Better have it.
It should have the same parameters as the thing you're replacing, or in the production code, or it should have what's it called? Capture all parameters, parameter type as well. So, but yes, you can also just create your own stubs of components. Typically, you don't need to do that. Typically, the addStub will do all the work for you. Another option, if you don't like creating additional components in your code base, you can actually use something like MOQ or in substitute to just create a mock of in this case, third-party component or third-party button, because unless the component vendor has done something specifically, most of the lifecycle methods of a component are virtual in Blazor by default. So it works surprisingly well just to use a mocking library to mock out third-party things if you want to do other things. And then you can use the mock to also assert against the fact that things were passed to that mock instead of what instead of the real one.
Isn't it? Obviously,
yes.
there was I need to find components.
Yes.
Because
so this is a good segue.
Yes, continue, please.
Yeah. So we showed how to go into the DOM tree and use find and find all, or wait for markup, or wait for elements. So that is inspecting the DOM tree, the elements that are produced by our component. But we also have access to the component tree, and for that we have a method called FindComponent, where you can say, hey, I want to go in under my component on the test and find any child component of this type. So if you just pass in FindComponent, it will return the first one that matches or none. Or, no, actually, it will just throw an exception if it doesn't find any. If you use the FindComponents plural method, then it'll return a list or an empty list of all components that matches that specific type.
Yes.
Now,
but we know it's only one, so let's take that.
Yeah, exactly. And once you have access to the component, you get a regular old C# object back that has all the public properties and public methods that is available on your component for you to call directly. And here you can definitely just do that. Like one example would be if, for example, your counter component has a callback method that would otherwise have been called by, maybe the stop of the third-party button. Instead, you can just call that method directly, simulating that happened. Or you can do as Steven is doing here, where you basically go through your stop and then call indirectly through that as well.
Yes. Perfect. I guess.
Okay. I think we are almost
out of time, and I don't think we can make big promises about V2 right now and what we want to do. I guess if you are interested into the development of V2, well, you have to follow us and hope us that we on a Friday we will stream.
Yes, exactly. We will do that usually.